Have you ever used one of those insulin pens, the smart ones that track your dose? Or maybe you've heard about drug-eluting stents. Well, if you have, you're looking right at the future of medicine. These are what we call combination products. They're these really fascinating hybrids where, a drug, a device, maybe even a biologic, they all come together.
Hmm.
The goal is one single powerful therapeutic effect. Now, these things are absolutely cutting edge, but here's the twist today. We're actually going to skip the amazing science of how they work.
Right.
And instead, we're diving deep into, well, the massive, complex global headache of how they get approved. So our focus today is mapping out this confusing, often contradictory regulatory landscape for these new medical hybrids. Welcome to DDReg Knowledge Capsule.
And our mission today, well, it's absolutely vital for anyone involved in health tech, anyone tracking it, really. We need to look across the sources we have and figure out, is the path for these combination products actually getting simpler? Are we heading towards global convergence? Or is the inherent complexity of mixing drugs, devices, biologics, is that actually making the regulatory burden worse for companies worldwide?
Yeah, and the sheer scale of this market really suggests this isn't just some academic problem, right? It's a huge bottleneck for the industry. Our sources confirm it. Combination products are fundamentally changing medicine right now. We're talking about a global market valued at USD 138.48 billion in 2023. Pretty substantial.
But here's the number that really jumps out at me. That market, it's projected to almost double. We're looking at USD 251.9 billion by 2030. That's a compound annual growth rate of 9%.
Wow.
That kind of growth, well, it's almost unheard of in more traditional medicine sectors.
And just as important is the volume, the sheer number of filings. Our sources say nearly 30%, think about that, almost a third of all medical product filings now involve some kind of drug-device combination.
It's not niche anymore.
Definitely not niche, it's mainstream.
And that volume, like you just said, it really highlights the core challenge here. The difficulty isn't so much the science or the engineering anymore. We can build these smart injectors, these complex delivery systems. The complexity has shifted. It's now almost entirely about navigating the regulations because, well, every major region, the US, Europe, Asia, has its own distinct and often pretty rigid way of handling these blended products.
Okay, so let's unpack that, starting with the basics. What exactly is a combination product in the eyes of a regulator?
Well, at its heart, it's any product that merges two or more regulated components. Think an active drug ingredient and a mechanical injector pen. And these parts are combined physically, chemically, whatever, to achieve one single therapeutic goal. You can't just approve the drug bit and ignore the device bit.
Right.
The whole package is the product.
Okay, let's look at the U.S. first. The FDA, they regulate these mainly under 21 CFR Part 4. That sets out the manufacturing rules, CGMP, current good manufacturing practice. And the whole system really pivots around one office, the Office of Combination Products, or OCP.
The OCP, yeah, they're kind of the initial gatekeeper. Their first job, and it's a critical one, is deciding which center leads the review. Is it CDER for drugs, CBER for biologics, or CDRH for devices?
And how do they make that call?
They use this fundamental principle. It's really the cornerstone of the whole field.
Right.
The primary mode of action, or PMOA.
PMOA.
Right.
It sounds simple on the surface, but figuring out if the product's main therapeutic effect comes from the chemical action of the drug or the mechanical action of the device, well, that decision can dictate years of very different testing and regulatory work.
Exactly. And what's interesting is seeing how the U.S. is trying to sort of force consistency within that complex system. Our sources point out that the eStar submission system is now required for the device parts of these combination product filings.
eStar, the electronic submission template.
That's the one. It's this mandated digital structured format. It's a clear push towards standardization, trying to make the device side of the application less ambiguous, less variable.
But hang on, isn't eStar still voluntary in some cases? And doesn't adding these complex digital validation steps sometimes create, new hurdles?
Yeah.
Especially for smaller companies maybe not as familiar with that tech submission process.
That's a really fair point. I mean, the intent is consistency, definitely. But the implementation, yeah, it can be a hurdle. It certainly demands a higher level of regulatory tech savviness inside the company. It's basically forcing manufacturers to get up to speed with digital standards faster than they might have planned.
Okay, so that's the U.S. approach. Heavily reliant on PMOA and now pushing eStar. How does that compare with Europe?
Well, Europe operates under more of a dual system. You've got the EU MDR, the Medical Device Regulation 2021-745 for the device side, and then Directive 2001-83 EC for the pharmaceutical component.
So two main pieces of legislation working together.
Right. And here's where we see a subtle but really important difference from the FDA's PMOA focus. The European Medicines Agency, the EMA, often uses a slightly different lens. They talk about the principal versus ancillary component.
Principal versus ancillary. How does that actually differ from PMOA in practice?
It's nuanced. The EMA's approach often looks at which part provides the main intended purpose, sure, but it can lean more heavily on the pre-existing regulatory status of the components. So, for instance, if you have a device, maybe a prefilled syringe, and it contains a drug, the drug might be deemed ancillary unless it fundamentally changes how the syringe itself performs or its intended use.
I see.
This focus on the component's role relative to the whole can sometimes lead to different classification outcomes compared to the FDA's approach, which is more purely focused on the therapeutic action.
And even with these big EU laws, the MDR and the directive, our sources suggest Europe still struggles with complexity, right?
Oh, absolutely, particularly with things like custom-made combination products or newer tech like 3D printed ones, and especially borderline products. There's tricky ones where it's genuinely unclear if it's primarily a device delivering a drug or a drug enabled by a device. The pathways there can still be quite ambiguous and sometimes vary between different EU member states.
Which really brings us back to why understanding that PMOA concept, or at least the underlying principle, is so critical for manufacturers wherever they are.
It's the strategic core, absolutely. It's like the compass. It points you to the right regulatory authority, tells you what kind of data you'll need, what quality system requirements apply. The source material actually lays out a pretty clear strategic process manufacturers often follow.
Okay, let's break that down. What are the key steps listeners should have in mind?
Right. Step 1, rigorously determine that PMOA. Is it the drug, the device, or maybe a biologic component that delivers the primary therapeutic benefit? You have to nail this down. Step 2, figure out the lead regulatory group. In the U.S., that's the OCP assigning CDER, CBER, or CDRH. In the EMA, it's navigating that principal versus ancillary determination. Step 3, based on that, select your primary submission type. Is it an NDA for a drug-led combo, a BLA for a biologic-led one, or a PMA for a device-led one? These first 3 steps, they basically shape the next decade of your product's regulatory life.
And then there's step 4, which you often hear emphasized, early engagement.
Cannot stress that enough. This means getting in front of the regulators early. Pre-submission meetings are crucial. Or in the U.S. specifically, you can file a request for designation, an RFD, to get the FDA's formal opinion on the PMOA and the lead center before you lock in your whole development plan.
Why is that so vital?
Because you have to clarify their data expectations up front. If you guess wrong about what studies they'll want to see for the secondary component, you risk wasting millions in years on tests they didn't need. Or worse, having to go back and do completely different studies late in the game. Massive rework.
So get that cross-functional team, regulatory, chemistry, engineering talking early, align on the PMOA, engage the agency. That saves years down the line.
Exactly. Because the final steps are really demanding. You have to prepare what's called a unified dossier. This document essentially has to merge the drug world, the CTD or eCTD format, which standardizes drug information with the device world, meaning all the required technical documentation, which follows different ISO standards. It's like translating between 2 languages.
And then comes the audit. You mentioned hybrid inspections. What makes those so challenging?
This is where those institutional silos really hit the factory floor. You might literally have device auditors focused on QSR, quality system regulation compliance, sitting next to drug auditors looking for CGMP compliance. And sometimes they're looking at the very same process, maybe data integrity for batch release, but through 2 completely different regulatory checklists and expectations.
That sounds intense.
It can be if your internal quality system wasn't designed from the very beginning to meet both CGMP and ISO 13485, the key international device standard. That inspection can become a major friction point. It can easily lead to findings that delay approval, sometimes for years.
Which really underscores the central conflict here, this elusive goal of regulatory convergence. We see major international groups like the IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, and the WHO, pushing hard for harmonization and reliance between agencies.
They're definitely pushing. There's a lot of talk about convergence, reliance pathways, yet the reality on the ground, true seamless convergence remains.
Well, elusive is a good word for it. And the cost of this misalignment is huge. Our sources confirm that discrepancies, even just between 2 major markets like the US and EU, can easily add 6 to 18 months to a global launch timeline.
6 to 18 months. Yeah. I recall hearing about a complex orthopedic implant, a combination product, where slightly different PMOA views on the bone cement component held up the U.S. approval significantly, even after it was already available in Europe. That's real money, real patient access delayed.
So why? If everyone agrees on the goal safe and effective products for patients, why can't the regulators just get on the same page with the paperwork?
It's systemic, really. Several big issues are at play. First, you've got these deeply entrenched legal frameworks. How a drug versus a device is legally defined can differ significantly nation by nation. These aren't just policies, they're embedded in law. Second, those institutional silos we talked about. They're real and persistent. Drug divisions, device divisions, biologics divisions, they often still operate quite separately within the agencies. Even if an OCP equivalent assigns a lead center, the actual review often involves handoffs and consultations that slow things down and can lead to inconsistencies.
And you mentioned standards earlier.
Right. You have conflicting or at least non-aligned global standards. You've got ICH guidelines mainly for drugs, ISO standards driving device development, and then WHO guidance trying to bridge things. It's a complex web.
But maybe the most concrete evidence of this lack of alignment comes from this data point in our source material. It's quite striking.
Which one's that?
This 2024 computational analysis, it looked at the terminology used in regulatory databases, FDA, EMA, and China's NMPA, and it found less than 45% semantic overlap in the classification terms they use. Less than 45%.
Less than half. Just think about that. It means for the majority of terms used to classify the exact same components of a complex combination product, these major agencies are essentially speaking different languages.
Wow.
That's not just anecdotal, it's data-driven proof that convergence is, at best, very partial right now. It's like a fundamental translation failure baked into the system.
And when you connect that semantic gap back to what manufacturers actually experience, you see these persistent regional issues clearly. Like in the US, you still hear about borderline product ambiguities and those audit headaches from the GMP versus QSR overlap.
Exactly. And in Europe, it's often inconsistent interpretation or implementation of the EU rules at the national level. What clears in Germany might hit a snag based on a slightly different interpretation in France. Plus those differing views on principal versus ancillary. And then you look at Asia Pacific, a huge and growing market, and you see highly variable regulatory maturity across countries, and often a lack of standardized definitions, making a unified regional strategy really challenging.
Okay, so it sounds complex, maybe even a bit messy right now. But let's shift focus. Are there encouraging signs? What specific shifts should people be tracking that suggest we might be moving towards better synchronization in, say, 2025 and beyond?
Yes, absolutely. Despite the challenges, there are definitely key policy moves and technological trends pushing towards alignment. And interestingly, it seems like this alignment will increasingly be driven by data and technology itself, rather than waiting for slow, painful legislative changes. One of the biggest drivers is digital health integration. Both the FDA and EMA are putting a huge emphasis on connected combination products. Think inhalers that track usage via an app, or delivery systems with AI-driven modules.
Right, the software component becomes much more central.
Precisely. And dealing with software, data security, cybersecurity, AI validation that inherently forces regulators towards more common technical ground, towards shared standards because the technology itself is global. Linked to this, you have things like the eStar mandate in the US pushing for structured digital data from the start, and we're seeing more piloting of true hybrid inspections.
The ones trying to bridge GMP and QSR.
Yes. These integrated audits are specifically designed to align those expectations, with a really intense focus on data integrity across the entire system, drug and device aspects together. Regulators are realizing they need to audit the system, not just siloed components.
That makes sense. And what about terminology? That 45% gap sounds like a big hurdle.
It is, but there's movement there too. The Global Medical Device Nomenclature, or GMDN, is gaining significant traction. It's now used as a standard coding system for devices in over 70 countries. While it doesn't solve everything, having a common language for device components is a crucial step. It simplifies traceability, helps in post-market surveillance, and slowly chips away at those semantic gaps.
So the picture emerging is less about one big global rulebook and more about dynamic alignment.
I think that's a great way to put it. The next frontier seems to be adaptive convergence. Agencies using shared data standards, maybe even AI tools themselves, to compare regulations, identify discrepancies, and align dynamically as technology evolves. Convergence driven by data and necessity, not just committees.
Okay, this is incredibly useful context. So let's bring it down to action. If you're working in this space, maybe you're in regulatory affairs, maybe product development, maybe you're an investor, what are the concrete takeaways? How do you navigate this complex maze now?
Right. Translating this into strategy is key. Four main things come to mind based on our sources. First, you absolutely must invest in robust, proactive regulatory intelligence. Don't just track the FDA and EMA. You need eyes on Japan's PMDA, on key emerging markets, all simultaneously. Treating these sequentially just burns time and money.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second, build your quality system for global approval from day one. Don't just meet, say, FDA's QSR initially and plan to add ISO 13485 later. Align your internal systems with both CGMP requirements and ISO 13485 right from the start. Design for the toughest combination of requirements you'll face globally. It prevents painful retrofitting later.
Okay, Reg Intel first, integrating quality system second.
Third, actively look for and use reliance and recognition pathways where they exist. If one major credible agency has already done a thorough review, leverage that. Make the case for reliance to other agencies to potentially shorten those review cycles. Remember those 6 to 18-month delays? Reliance can help mitigate that.
Good point. And the final takeaway.
Finally, and this loops back to the beginning, maintain absolute consistency in your PMOA justification or your principal ancillary argument in Europe. Define your product's primary mechanism clearly and stick to that same core argument across all jurisdictions you submit to. Waffling or changing your story based on the region is a red flag for regulators and dramatically increases your risk of reclassification, which can completely derail a global launch strategy.
So consistency is key for that core classification.
Absolutely. Fundamental.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it's been a really complex but also fascinating look at where combination product regulation stands. It feels like we're at a crossroads.
I think that's right. You have global agencies. They clearly share the same public health goals. They are trying to coordinate more.
But the operational reality for manufacturers is still, well, complex. Those institutional silos, that less than 45% semantic overlap, that's the day-to-day challenge.
Exactly. So the conclusion seems to be that the path forward isn't a single destination of convergence achieved through legislation alone. It's more likely this adaptive convergence we talked about. Regulators aligning more dynamically, driven by shared data standards, by technology like AI helping to interpret and align rules, and often pushed by the sheer pace of innovation itself.
The strategy for industry, then, seems clear. You have to anticipate these shifts, build flexibility in. Don't just react when a new guidance drops.
Precisely. Be proactive, not reactive.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We know digital therapeutics, smart biologics, AI-driven diagnostics, they're all innovating incredibly fast. So the question is, what specific role will these rapidly advancing technologies play in forcing regulators to finally bridge those semantic gaps, that 55% where they're not aligned faster than anyone currently anticipates? Will technology itself become the great harmonizer? Something to think about. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Go explore.